completely different incentives. I mean, these are issues that need to be considered. All this stuff has to be on the table. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is more than just about spending or balanced budgets or debt. Ultimately, it is about right and wrong. And here I want to close, but it's a long close, so I'm building up to something, okay? I want to close with a little story from Robert Nozick. Robert Nozick, the late Robert Nozick, was a Harvard philosopher who wrote a book in 1974, won a bunch of awards, called Anarchy, State, and Utopia. And I want to read to you, well, these are going to be my words, but they're his ideas. I want to read to you his Tale of the Slave. And it goes through 9 stages, but they're very short. The Tale of the Slave runs like this. First, and he invites all of us to consider ourselves as the slave in the story. First stage, you are a slave at the mercy of a brutal master who forces you to work for his purposes and beats you arbitrarily. Second, the master decides to beat you only for breaking the rules and even grants you some free time. Third, you are part of a group of slaves subject to this master. He decides, on grounds acceptable to everyone, how goods should be allocated among you all. Fourth, the master requires his slaves to work only 3 days per week, granting them the other 4 days off. They can do as they wish during their free time. Fifth, the master now allows the slaves to work wherever they wish. His main caveat is that they must send him 3/7 of their wages, corresponding to the 3 days' worth of work they once had to do on his land every week. In an emergency, he can force them to do his bidding once again, and he retains the power to alter the fraction of their wages to which he lays claim. Sixth, the master grants all 10,000 of his slaves, except you, the right to vote. They can decide among themselves how much of their and your earnings to take and what outlets to fund with the money. They can decide what you are and are not allowed to do. We can suppose, for the sake of argument, that the master irrevocably grants this right to the 10,000 slaves. You now have 10,000 masters or a single 10,000-headed master. Seventh, you are granted the freedom to try to persuade the 10,000 to exercise their vast powers in a particular way. You still do not have the right to vote, but you can try to influence those who do. Eighth, the 10,000 grant you the right to vote, but only to break a tie. You write down your vote, and if a tie should occur, they open it and record it. No tie has ever occurred. Ninth, you are granted the right to vote, but functionally, it simply means, as in the 8th stage, that in case of a tie, which has never occurred, your vote carries the issue. Nozick's question is this: at what stage between 1 and 9 did this become something other than the tale of a slave? Well, that's an interesting unexamined question, because it is an unexamined premise of our society across the American political spectrum, that society cannot function without a single coercive institution with the power to dispose of the lives and fortunes of over 300 million individuals. While throwing the poor a few scraps in 1,001 open and covert ways, this institution enriches various elites at the expense of the productive population. The more it grows, the worse it gets. More and more sectors of society conclude that they, too, must enrich themselves by means of government-granted privilege. Everyone begins to clamor for subsidies just in order to break even. The industrialists take, the farmers take, the scientists take, the military establishment takes, the social workers take, the education bureaucracy takes, everybody takes. All of this looting under cover of law is what Frederick Bastiat, the great 19th century French economist, memorably called legal plunder. No one considers it legitimate to stick a gun in his neighbor's ribs and take his things. Yet we are taught to believe that a dramatic moral difference separates that kind of open stealing with the indirect kind. In other words, when the government sticks a gun in your neighbor's ribs and hands the proceeds to you. Nozick put it like this: when you tax away from someone the fruits of 5 months of his labor, you are in effect taking away 5 months from him. You are taking away part of his life. Dance around the issue all you like, but this is forced labor by any reasonable definition of the term. To be honest, when I said Harvard philosopher, you weren't expecting it to turn out quite this well. But can this really... Is it so unimaginable to conceive of a society in which we finally put the guns down and deal with each other on the basis of reason and compassion rather than force? Bastiat once described the state as the great fictitious entity by which everyone seeks to live at the expense of everyone else. Well, this arrangement is coming to an end. Something is going to have to give. We're facing fiscal collapse. We may be confronting a currency collapse in which the dollar's purchasing power will fall precipitously over the course of a short period of time. And then there won't be anything left for the poor or for the pressure groups or for anyone else except a bunch of worthless promises. And every year the crisis is not addressed, the situation becomes all the worse. So, in short, the propaganda with which we are flooded regarding how indispensable our wise overlords in Washington is, this is unworthy of a sixth grader. We would not die instantly were it not for the constant oversight of our overlords in Washington. We would flourish. And here's the proof. Thank you all very much.